Okay, so guess he just waited a month of his life. This guy. Well, was he? Yeah, it was a waste. So I just spent far too long playing every Far Cry game I could. That's 6 main games, 2 DLCs, 2 spin-offs, and a bit of DLC sprinkled on top. And if you're wondering why, well, you should probably read the title of the video. How are you watching this without knowing why? But anyway, so I wanted to see if Far Cry games have gone the way of the ring, in a volcano. So yeah, are they still good anymore? And, well, basically, no. Because I mean, the last Far Cry game I remember playing, and actually the only, is Far Cry 3, starring everyone's favourite drug cartel member, Nacho. Oh. Well, anyway. Because, I mean, if you look at the Metacritic scores, should be over here. And, yeah, if you look at those, you can see they've kind of dropped off since Far Cry 3. And this is the audience scores, because I don't follow critic scores, because they're often overblown and pretty shit. But, anyway, as you can see, yeah, it peaks at Far Cry 3 and then takes a bit of a tumble. And I mean, if you put my scores next to that, you can see, well, I pretty much agree with some games having discrepancies, but for the most of it, yeah, Far Cry isn't really a good series anymore. But hey, I didn't say you could go yet. I spent too damn long playing these games to not have at least like a 10-minute video out of it. So what I've decided is the main problem with Far Cry. Well, you've got 3 different types of games here. You've got Far Cry 1, 2, and then all the rest. Because it is quite an accurate assumption that after Far Cry 3, the games pretty much just copy it and don't innovate anymore. Because, I mean, if you start at Far Cry 1, it's a wildly different game. I mean, it's aged like your grandpa's old leg. It might still look alright, but there is some gangrene there. And by that I mean it's a product of its time. I mean, it's just a linear action game, roam for a forest, shoot bad guys. It looks alright. The guns there are a decent amount of guns and it's passable gunplay. But where it really goes to hell is the AI in this game. I mean, you've got the AI is some of the worst I've ever seen, because you have anywhere between really good gun skill on the AI to just straight up wall hacks, because it's in a jungle, so there are bushes in a jungle, yes, that is known. The AI doesn't get interrupted by objects without meshes, objects that you can walk through like bushes. So whereas your vision might be blocked by a bush, the AI can see right through it and will just shoot you without actually being able to see you. But then you've got also just straight up wall hacks where bulletproof walls, the AI seems to just be able to see through it. I don't know if that was just some sort of glitch that happened on my end, but yeah, too many times was I just getting shot through walls. So yeah, that really made the game bad. But hey, it went better after I just turned on God mode, yeah, without the fear of dying. It was just an alright shoot 'em up game with no real story or characters. Just walk forward, shoot the bad guys, and win. Yeah. Oh, and there was some weird little monkey horror things, which was alright. Kind of seemed to me like a something I'd seen before, but yeah. And then I mean, the jump from Far Cry 1 to 2 is it's massive. I mean, where Far Cry 1 was just a linear shoot 'em up game, Far Cry 2 is a pretty decent open world. I mean, it's big, it's expansive, there are side missions to do, you've got an actual plotline, cinematics, and the graphics wise, most Far Cry games in the beginning have massive increases in their graphics each game, and that's true for this game as well. It looks far better than Far Cry 1. And yeah, with kind of companions in this game, it's decent. However, this is a game I never actually finished because it is, damn, it's a It's a game for those who like to die a lot. So, this game is for those who see their gun jamming in every gunfight and go, yes please. For those who only have fast travel in the corners of a massive map and think, don't mind if I do. For those who see themselves having to constantly top up on malaria pills and think, just like the good old days. But as I'm not one of these people, I found lots of these realism, I guess you call them, realism features just annoying. So yeah, and also the plot took a while to get through. It wasn't the most interesting, but overall it's definitely not a bad game. If you're into those ultra realistic games that just punish you for existing, I'd say check it out. It's the most punishing open world I've seen in a while. So yeah.
So now we get to Far Cry 3 and the games beyond. So the first big problem with the Far Cry games after Far Cry 3 is, well, it's the most obvious one, it's just the lack of innovation. Because all of the games after Far Cry 3 just follow the same blueprints that Far Cry 3 gave. Those being finding yourself surrounded by a group of psychopaths with an unhinged leader, and then, having to navigate and kill that leader while helping a small rebel group along the way. And you do this by travelling around the area, unlocking areas by taking out outposts, defeating the little mini bosses who control certain areas until you finally take the entire map over and kill the big bad in like a 20-minute cutscene. Now, this is a critique for the later games, but it is still in Far Cry 3, and the reason it works there, I think, is because it's the first one to do it in the Far Cry franchise. It was a new format they were using, therefore it's not dull and repetitive. It's new. As it's not a bad format to use, it's just when these are AAA games and you're basically just copying what the last one gave you for 4 straight games, you can see why the quality or the perceived quality dips. And yeah, this is one of the big reasons or problems with the Far Cry games, is that they just don't care enough, it seems, to try something new. Because when they make money, why take risks? Now, the 2 other reasons why I think the games have now started to fail is one being Bloat, and the second being the poor heroes and villains that have come after Far Cry 3. Now, by Bloat, I mean the fact that the maps in these games keep getting bigger and bigger, and yet there's nothing entertaining to fill them. I mean, I'll show here on screen just a video showing all the different map sizes of the games, where you can see how much the maps grow by. I mean, Far Cry 6 alone is almost 3 times as big as Far Cry 3, which is just stupid. And while there are more side quests in these later games, Far Cry side quests have never really been something to enjoy. They're normally just fetch quests and kill quests, which are fine in their own right, but it's not enough to fill massive empty maps. So yeah, it just makes the maps seem bland. And for heroes, well, it's just pretty disappointing. Where Far Cry 3 had some nice nuance with its main character, as you can draw parallels from Jason to Vass, as they're both pawns being used by Citra. And this allows Vass to become an example to Jason of what he will become if he continues down the path, and this is shown through the good acting of the 2 characters. But in the later games, I mean, when there even is a main character, there's no real punching point linking them to the main story and driving it. They're just along for the ride, really. Well, Far Cry 4 has the best main character after Jason, as the main character has actually something to do with the main story. There's a reason for them to be going on their path. They want to bury their mum's ashes, and the only way to do that, it seems, is to get rid of a monarchy or dictatorship, whatever pagan min was. But anyway, the character still has no real personality. You can barely hear him speak in the game, and there's no he's just there. And while Far Cry 6 seemingly tries to change this by having lots of cutscenes with your main character in them, your main character talks a hell of a lot, they don't really have any personality except from Gorilla. That's it. That's all about them. Allowing them to just be easily taken out and replaced by fucking anyone, and it wouldn't change the story whatsoever. So if you have a character who's in the cutscenes, that's good, but they still need to be a character in their own right. They can't just be bland and nothingness. And, well, Far Cry 5 decided to not pretend in any way and just literally had no main character. You're just there, you don't have any voice lines or nothing, no face. Oh no, there's a character creation, however there's no third person mode, so apart from a photo mode in the game, there's no real point of it. But anyway, the main point is there's no voice line, no personalities, nothing in your main character. You're just a person. And that's just, in a game like this, it's a bit disappointing. And for villains, I think you can draw parallels to Bioshock, because in Bioshock you have Andrew Ryan, the main villain. However, he's only actually seen once in the game during his death, but the presence of him is felt throughout the entire game. And this is done through the use of audio clips and sub-villains, who allow you to get to know the character really without even having to see them on screen once. And I believe this is similar to what the Far Cry games do, because you only meet the villain twice in them. Once when, at the very beginning of the game, when they attempt to kill you and you run off, survive and meet the rebel group, and the second time at the end of the game when you kill them. But yeah, and during the middle of these times, you're going around killing their lieutenants. And instead of just audio of the main villain, you get to see their reaction every time you kill one of their lieutenants. This is except for Far Cry 3, where there are no lieutenants, and you just simply have direct conflict with Vass throughout the game, meeting him multiple times. Now, this shows Bioshock and Far Cry 3 then show how an indirect and a direct villain can still work. However, if you look at Bioshock, it's a 10-hour game, and the Far Cry 4 and onwards are around 20 hours. And this extra length leads to two problems. One being that you now have to rely a lot more on the lieutenants to fill this gap. And then secondly, you have to, there's a chance that your main villain is just going to be forgotten because you don't interact with them whatsoever throughout, let's say, 18-ish hours of gameplay. Now, I found that in Far Cry games, the lieutenants are never really interesting. And I think this is because of the fact that they didn't really have enough time to be developed into actual characters before they're killed off, and this just forces them to rely on little gimmicks in order to stay interesting, which just doesn't work. And even worse than that is the fact that the main villain only gets around half an hour screen time in a 20-hour game, with all of that except from those little reaction videos being the start and end of the game. I just found myself being completely disconnected from the villain due to this, as they haven't been built up enough to be substantial, no matter what actor plays them, meaning that when you get to the end of the game and you got your climax with the main villain, I just couldn't give a shit about them, which that's just such a bad way for the game to end. And so after talking about these 3 points, which I think are the most important in why Far Cry games are not very good anymore, I got to bring up another, which is the prices of these games. While I have been saying why the Far Cry games are all worse than Far Cry 3 really, the prices just, it doesn't show that. As you start with Far Cry 3 being £17, and I think this is a really good price for a game that good, but it is old, so it won't look as good as a modern game. And then you get to Far Cry 4, which is now £26, a bit more expensive, but I think it's well worth it, because this game, I thought it was the best after Far Cry 3, and its graphics really hold up. It's a massive graphical improvement over Far Cry 3, so that's still a game that looks good and plays good, and it's only £26. Then you get to Far Cry 5, which is £50, and it launched with microtransactions. Which, and it still has microtransactions, by the way, for in-game skins, which for a single-player game, why the fuck are you having paid skins? That's just so greedy. But anyway, the game does look better than Far Cry 4, but it's not double the price better. Even if it did come out 4 years later, it's not worth £50. It's too shitty of a game for that. And then you get to Far Cry 6, which it did alright for the fact that it didn't have any microtransactions, and it did not increase the price for the first time at £50 still, but it's still not worth £50. It's too shitty of a game for that. So although I could keep talking about why the mainline games have gotten bad, I still do want to speak about the DLCs and the standalone games in this video. So I'm going to start talking about the standalone games now. Far Cry Primal and New Dawn, because goddamn, those are the real pieces of shit in this series. So the first DLC coming out after Far Cry 4 is Primal, and I don't think it's a bad game in its own right if it was a DLC, but it's not, it's a game. So, well, it has some interesting elements to it, like the fact that you got no guns, introduction of animal followers which you can ride, like, I don't know, you got your bears, your lions, that's good. There's no story whatsoever apart from beat the means caveman sculling with a bat, and I mean, it looks the same as its predecessor graphics wise, has the same fucking map, they didn't even bother making a new one. It's just got a new coat of paint bushed over it, and yet it costs 16 quid more than Far Cry 4, and that's why I gave it such a low rating for not being bad in its own right, just because it's really short, no story, but it's still an alright game if it was like a cheap DLC or something. But no, it's more expensive than the last game, which is just stupidly overpriced. So now we can talk about shitty and overpriced with Far Cry New Dawn. A game which takes Primal's way of just reusing the same map to be lazy, but also reuses the same environment and just slaps a coat of paint on it. But it looks worse because it's so poorly optimised that I had to use a lower graphics setting than I did for the previous game, even though it's the exact same fucking graphics as the previous game. So it's just looks shittier, that's so dumb. Now, I could only play 2 hours of this game and I still needed a fucking brain scan afterwards. That's how goddamn shit it is. So instead of trying to describe it, I'm just gonna fucking walk you through the 2 hours which I played and wanted to fucking die. So you start the game off like all Far Cry games by meeting the main villain as they give you a whack on the head, except from this time they're just some obnoxious TikTok pranksters that you've thrown into the Far Cry universe. And then I get into a gunfight and quickly learn that you can't change aiming sensitivity in this game for some reason. I don't know why that is, turning my aim into what would be a 5-year-old's on acid attempt at gaming. I then get to see a UI which just makes me want to fucking die. This is just not good. I then get to see the worst part of this game, which is that it's just a fucking grind fest. And by what I mean by that is that unlike in some other Far Cry games where you can skip the boring open world by just using stuff like fast travel and spawning cars, in order to do that in this game you need to unlock it, I guess, by gathering resources throughout the world. So it's like you're playing goddamn Rust or something. And so in order to unlock fast travel, I go and clear an outpost. It was fairly easy. And then I go to redo the outpost to unlock a car. I thought that was a fairly good feature, so I don't need to explore the outpost loads. I can just redo this singular one 50 times and unlock everything. But no, when I go to redo it, it replaces the enemies with ones which are much more spongy than the last, which I kind of expected, but ones that can't actually be stealth killed, as in order to be able to stealth kill them I need to unlock that on the perk tree. And how do I unlock that on the perk tree? Well, I need to, you guessed it, explore the open world more. And it was at that point I realised this isn't actually a fucking game, it's just an experiment, see if you can get people to waste money and time due to a brand name. So I decided, sod that, thanked my Steam keys, and just did something else with the rest of my day. So now the final piece of content is the only one I actually think has improved over time, and that being DLCs. And the first DLC being the Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon, well, I appreciate it for what it is, as like a wacky 90s sci-fi thing. It's just not really for me, so I just played like half an hour of it and left it. But it's fine in its own right. And then the next DLCs were in Far Cry 5 with a Vietnam one, a Mars one, and a zombie one. Now the Vietnam and the Mars one, no, the Vietnam and the zombie one are what I classify as, your perfect easy DLC. And by that I mean there is no story to them or nothing. It's just a new environment with some new action. Go from point A to point B shoot the bad guys, have a bit of fun. And I mean, the Mars one for Far Cry 5 tried to involve some story, but the gameplay was just repeat a menial task around 20 odd times. So yeah, I didn't do that one because I'm not wasting my time doing this. I wasted enough of my time playing Far Cry games, for fuck's sake. And so the best DLC actually come from the worst mainline game, Far Cry 6, as these DLCs have you playing as the main villains from the past 3 games. And I mean, it follows the linear point A to B shoot 'em up mechanic, but each of the environments is based off the villain's specific game, which is nice to see. Like, just updated graphics, especially Far Cry 3 is such an old game. It was nice to see the environments just upscaled. But not only was there just good old fun gameplay, it actually improves the backgrounds for the villains, which is always nice and especially needed in Far Cry 4 and 5's case, and especially Far Cry 5 with the Seed Man or whatever his name was, where the character was just completely bland in the actual main game, I found. So it was nice to give them some backstory. So when a DLC managed to be entertaining in its own right, but also just improve the main games, that's a really good DLC. So yeah, that's it. Apologies it took a while to get this video up as a mixture of me feeling like shit for the past week or so. The fact I have to play all these Far Cry games, that takes time, and I had some exams a bit ago. But yeah, video up now, hurrah. I mean, this video could have, despite being quite long, it could have been a lot longer. I mean, I didn't even talk about the absolutely horrendous endings of Far Cry 5 and 6. I mean, I could have kept on talking about how bad New Dawn is. I mean, the Joseph Seed character, he's just utter shit. Lots of talking points I didn't go into, but that's because I wanted there to be some direction in this video, not just me ranting about all the things I thought were stupid in Far Cry games. Like, cheerio.